It was a humid summer evening in the outskirts of Kyoto, where the cicadas' chorus filled the air with an incessant, eerie hum. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of crimson and violet. The narrow, winding road leading through the dense forest seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowed by the looming shadows of towering cedar trees. The smell of damp earth and pine needles permeated the air, creating an almost suffocating atmosphere. As the last light faded, the forest plunged into an inky darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of fireflies. In this unsettling ambience, a solitary car navigated the twists and turns of the road. The driver, Hiroshi Tanaka, a middle-aged businessman, was on his way back from a late meeting in the city, his eyes strained to pierce the darkness, the headlights casting elongated shadows that danced eerily across the road. Beside him sat his younger colleague, Yuki Sato, a fresh recruit in the company, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Are we on the right path, Hiroshi-san?" Yuki asked, her voice trembling slightly. Hiroshi nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his gut since they entered the forest. "Yes, this is the only road that leads to the village. Just a bit longer and we'll be out of here." The road seemed to grow narrower and the trees thicker, their branches intertwining above to form a natural canopy. The oppressive darkness pressed in from all sides, and the only sound apart from the engine was the occasional rustling of leaves. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the headlight's beam, standing motionless by the side of the road. Hiroshi's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively hit the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. Yuki gasped, clutching the seat. In the stark, artificial light, they saw a young woman, drenched from head to toe, as if she had been caught in a torrential downpour. Her long, black hair clung to her face and shoulders, and her white dress was stained with mud. Hiroshi rolled down the window slightly, enough to speak, but not enough to let the cold night air in. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" he called out. The woman lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting Hiroshi's with a hollow, distant stare. "Please," she said in a soft, almost ethereal voice, "I need to get home. Can you give me a ride?" Hiroshi hesitated, glancing at Yuki, who nodded slightly, her expression filled with concern. "All right, get in," Hiroshi said, unlocking the doors. The woman slid into the back seat, her presence bringing a chill into the car despite the warm night. "Where do you need to go?" Hiroshi asked as he started the car again. The woman gave him an address in a nearby village, one that was on their way. As they drove on, the silence in the car grew heavy, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the muted sound of the engine. Yuki turned to look at the woman, who sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Are you sure you're all right?" Yuki asked gently. The woman nodded but offered no further explanation. Hiroshi couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Something about the woman felt off, as if she didn't quite belong to this world. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees growing thicker, their branches almost touching the car. The oppressive darkness outside contrasted sharply with the artificial light inside the car, creating a surreal, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Finally, they reached the address the woman had given them. It was a small, old house, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs and surrounded by an ancient stone wall. "Thank you," the woman said softly, her voice barely audible. She opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the shadows without another word. Hiroshi and Yuki watched her go, a sense of relief washing over them as she vanished from sight. "That was strange," Yuki whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Hiroshi nodded, starting the car again. "Let's just get home," he said, his voice tense. As they drove away, a sense of normalcy returned, the oppressive atmosphere lifting with each passing mile. However, the image of the woman lingered in Hiroshi's mind, her hollow eyes haunting his thoughts. Back at his home, Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The encounter had felt too real, too vivid to be a mere figment of his imagination. He decided to do some research, hoping to find some explanation for what they had experienced. As he delved into the history of the village, he discovered an old urban legend about a young woman who had died in a car accident on that very road many years ago. According to the legend, her spirit would appear to travelers asking for a ride home, only to vanish once she reached her destination. A chill ran down Hiroshi's spine as he realized that they had encountered the ghostly hitchhiker of the legend. The realization brought a sense of dread, but also a strange sense of closure. The following days were uneventful, and life slowly returned to normal. Yet, the memory of that night lingered, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the world of the living and the dead. Every time Hiroshi drove down that road, he couldn't help but glance at the spot where they had found the woman, half expecting to see her standing there again. The experience had left an indelible mark on him, a story he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The Vanishing Hitchhiker had become more than just an urban legend. It had become a part of his reality. And in the quiet moments of the night, when the world was still and the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, Hiroshi would find himself reliving that fateful encounter, wondering if he would ever truly escape the haunting memory of the ghostly hitchhiker. The days passed uneventfully, yet Hiroshi's thoughts remained anchored to that eerie night. The image of the soaked woman and her haunting eyes lingered like an indelible stain on his memory. One evening, while having dinner with Yuki, Hiroshi decided to share his findings about the legend. The cozy warmth of the restaurant contrasted sharply with the chilling tale he was about to recount. "Yuki, I looked into the story of the woman we picked up," Hiroshi began, his voice low and measured. Yuki's eyes widened slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What did you find out, Hiroshi-san?" Hiroshi took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "There's an old urban legend about a young woman who died in a car accident on that road many years ago. People say her spirit haunts the area, asking for rides from unsuspecting travelers." Yuki shivered involuntarily, the gravity of the story settling in. "Do you really think it was her? That we saw a ghost?" Hiroshi nodded slowly, his expression serious. "It fits the description perfectly. The way she appeared out of nowhere, her soaked dress, the address she gave us. It all aligns with the legend." Conversation weighed heavily on them, both casting a shadow over their otherwise pleasant evening. As they left the restaurant, the streets outside were quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of the city subdued by the late hour. A chill breeze swept through, causing Yuki to pull her jacket tighter around her. "Let's take a walk," Hiroshi suggested, hoping the fresh air might help clear their minds. They strolled through the narrow alleys of Kyoto, the ancient temples and traditional houses lending an air of timelessness to their surroundings. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated the path, casting long, flickering shadows. Hiroshi's thoughts drifted back to the village, where they had dropped off the woman. An uneasy feeling gnawed at him, a sense that their encounter wasn't over. "Yuki, do you remember the address she gave us?" Hiroshi asked suddenly. Yuki nodded, her brow furrowing in thought. "Yes, I remember it." "Why?" "I think we should go back," Hiroshi said, his voice resolute. "We need to find out more about her and why she appeared to us." Yuki hesitated, clearly unsettled by that year. "Are you sure, Hiroshi-san? What if we find something? Something we don't want to know?" Hiroshi looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to. If we don't, this will haunt us forever." The following weekend, they made their way back to the village. The journey felt longer this time, the road seeming even more narrow and winding than before. The trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sky. As they approached the village, an eerie silence settled around them, broken only by the crunch of gravel under the tires. The house appeared just as they remembered it, old and decrepit, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs. They parked the car and stepped out, the oppressive atmosphere pressing in on them once more. Hiroshi and Yuki exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of their decision. Together, they approached the house, the wooden steps creaking ominously under their feet. Hiroshi knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the empty house. For a moment, there was no response, and they both felt a surge of relief, thinking perhaps no one was home. But then, the door creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly woman with sharp, piercing eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy and suspicious. Hiroshi cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "We're sorry to disturb you, but we had an unusual encounter recently. We picked up a woman on the road nearby, and she gave us this address. We were hoping to find out more about her." The old woman's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "A woman, you say? Describe her to me." Hiroshi and Yuki recounted their experience, the woman's soaked appearance, her hollow eyes, and the address she had given them. As they spoke, the old woman's face grew pale, and she let out a deep sigh. "I see. Come in then." Inside, the house was dimly lit and filled with the musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories. The old woman led them to a small sitting room, where she gestured for them to sit. "My name is Mrs. Nakamura," she began, settling into an armchair. "The woman you saw was my daughter, Keiko. She died in a car accident on that road 20 years ago." Hiroshi and Yuki exchanged a shocked glance, their worst fears confirmed. Mrs. Nakamura continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Keiko was on her way home from a friend's house when it happened. It was a rainy night, and the roads were slick. She lost control of the car and crashed. Ever since then, people have claimed to see her ghost, asking for a ride home." Tears welled up in the old woman's eyes as she spoke. Her grief still wore despite the passing years. "I don't know why she appears to some and not others, but I've heard many stories like yours. It seems she's still trying to come home." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Hiroshi felt a pang of sorrow for Mrs. Nakamura and her lost daughter. "Is there anything we can do to help her find peace?" Yuki asked softly. Mrs. Nakamura shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "I wish I knew. I pray for her every day, hoping she'll find her way to the other side. But so far, nothing has changed." They sat in silence for a while longer, the sound of the ticking clock the only noise in the room. Finally, Hiroshi stood up, a sense of resolution in his heart. "Thank you for sharing your story with us, Mrs. Nakamura. We'll keep your daughter in our thoughts and prayers." Mrs. Nakamura nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. It means a lot to know that people still remember her." As they drove back to the city, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift, replaced by a sense of closure. The encounter with Mrs. Nakamura had given them answers, but it had also left them with more questions. Why had Keiko appeared to them specifically? What could they do to help her spirit find peace? These questions lingered in their minds, but they also felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had become part of a story that transcended time, a connection between the living and the dead. The memory of Keiko and the ghostly hitchhiker would stay with them forever, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the next. And as they navigated the winding roads of life, they knew they would always carry a piece of that eerie night with them, a testament to the enduring power of love, loss, and the unending quest for closure. The village was bathed in the soft glow of dawn, the mist curling lazily around the ancient houses like a shroud. The streets were deserted, and the air was thick, with a sense of quiet anticipation. Hiroshi and Yuki returned to the village with a renewed determination, driven by a need to uncover the truth behind Keiko's restless spirit. They parked the car near the old house, its weathered facade standing as a silent witness to the past. As they stepped out, the cold morning air bit at their skin, but they ignored the discomfort, their focus solely on the task at hand. "We need to speak to the villagers," Hiroshi said, his voice steady with resolve. "Someone must know more about what happened to Keiko." Yuki nodded, her expression mirroring his determination. They made their way to the village center, where a small market was just beginning to stir with life. The villagers eyed them curiously, their whispers following Hiroshi and Yuki as they approached an elderly man who seemed to be in charge. "Excuse me," Hiroshi began politely. "We're looking for information about Keiko Nakamura. Can you help us?" The man's eyes narrowed, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Keiko Nakamura? What business do you have with her?" "We encountered her spirit," Yuki explained softly. "We want to understand why she still lingers here, and if there's anything we can do to help her find peace." The man's expression softened slightly, and he nodded. "Follow me," he said, leading them to a nearby tea house. Inside, the warm, inviting aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the air, providing a stark contrast to the chill outside. The man introduced himself as Kenji, a lifelong resident of the village. He poured them each a cup of tea before settling down to speak. "Keiko was well loved by everyone here," Kenji began, his voice tinged with sadness. "Her death was a tragedy that affected us all deeply. But there's more to the story than just a simple accident." Hiroshi and Yuki leaned in, their attention fully captured. Keiko was engaged to be married to a young man from the neighboring village. They were very much in love, but there were rumors, dark rumors about his family. Some said they practiced forbidden rituals. Others whispered about ancient curses. Kenji paused, taking a sip of his tea before continuing. On the night of her death, Keiko had been visiting her fiancé. She left in a hurry, looking distressed. No one knows what happened during that visit. But she crashed her car on the way back. Some say she was running from something or someone. Yuki's eyes widened in shock. "Do you think her fiancé's family had something to do with it?" Kenji shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But ever since that night, strange things have happened in this village. People hear whispers in the night, see shadows that shouldn't be there. And then, of course, there's Keiko's spirit, appearing to travelers on that road." Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine. "Has anyone tried to communicate with her spirit, to ask what she wants?" Kenji nodded. "Many have tried, but none have succeeded. Her spirit seems trapped, reliving that night over and over. Some believe she needs closure, but no one knows how to give it to her." A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed Kenji's words. Finally, Hiroshi spoke, his voice filled with determination. "We have to try. We can't leave her like this." That evening, they returned to the road, where they had first encountered Keiko's spirit. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air was thick with tension, and the cicada's chorus seemed almost deafening in the growing darkness. Hiroshi and Yuki stood by the roadside, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of the ghostly hitchhiker. They had brought offerings, flowers, incense, and a small shrine, hoping to appease Keiko's restless spirit. As the last light faded from the sky, a dense fog rolled in, cloaking the road in an eerie silence. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, slowly materializing from the mist. It was Keiko, her soaked dress clinging to her frail form, her eyes hollow and vacant. Hiroshi felt a lump in his throat as he stepped forward. "Keiko, we're here to help you," he called out, his voice trembling. Keiko's eyes flickered with recognition, and she took a hesitant step towards them. Yuki lit the incense and placed it on the shrine, the fragrant smoke curling upwards into the night sky. "We know about your fiancé," Yuki said softly. "We want to understand what happened that night." Keiko's expression twisted in anguish, and she let out a low, mournful wail. The sound sent shivers down their spines, but they stood their ground, determined to help her find peace. Slowly, Keiko began to speak, her voice a ghostly whisper carried on the wind. "I was betrayed," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "His family, they wanted to use me for their rituals. I ran, but I couldn't escape." Hiroshi and Yuki exchanged a horrified glance, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "Keiko, we will stop them," Hiroshi vowed. "We will make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Keiko's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, a flicker of hope crossed her face. "Thank you," she whispered before fading back into the mist, determined to fulfill their promise. Hiroshi and Yuki set out to investigate the neighboring village. They learned of a reclusive family that lived on the outskirts, rumored to be involved in dark practices. The villagers spoke of strange lights and noises coming from their property, and many avoided the area out of fear. Hiroshi and Yuki approached the family's house cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the dense undergrowth. The house was old and decrepit, its windows dark and foreboding. They knocked on the door, and after a long moment, it creaked open to reveal a middle-aged man with piercing eyes. "We're here to ask about Keiko Nakamura," Hiroshi said firmly, his gaze unwavering. The man's expression hardened, and he stepped aside to let them in. The interior of the house was dimly lit and filled with the scent of burning herbs. The atmosphere was oppressive, and Hiroshi and Yuki could feel the weight of the secrets hidden within these walls. "We know what your family did," Yuki said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed anger. The man's eyes flashed with something akin to fear, but he quickly masked it with indifference. "I don't know what you're talking about." Hiroshi stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "Keiko's spirit is trapped because of you. She told us everything. We won't leave until we make sure she can rest in peace." The man's facade cracked, and he sighed deeply. "Very well. Follow me." He led them to a hidden room at the back of the house. Inside, they found an altar covered with strange symbols and objects. "This is where it happened," the man admitted. "My family, they believed in using dark rituals to gain power. Keiko was supposed to be a part of that, but she escaped. Her spirit lingers because the ritual was never completed." Yuki's eyes filled with tears. "How can we free her?" The man hesitated before answering. "Destroy the altar. Burn it all. Only then will her spirit be free." Hiroshi and Yuki wasted no time. They gathered the items from the altar and took them outside, setting them ablaze. As the fire consumed the remnants of the dark rituals, they felt a sense of release, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. That night, they returned to the road one last time. The mist was gone, replaced by a clear, starry sky. Keiko appeared once more, but this time, her expression was peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can finally rest." With that, she faded away, her spirit finally at peace. Hiroshi and Yuki stood in silence, the enormity of what they had accomplished sinking in. They had bridged the gap between the living and the dead, bringing closure to a story that had haunted the village for decades. As they walked back to their car, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, they knew their lives would never be the same. The ghostly hitchhiker had become a part of their reality, a reminder of the enduring power of love, loss, and the quest for closure. And as they drove away, leaving the haunted road behind, they carried with them the memory of Keiko's peaceful smile, a testament to the triumph of light over darkness. The evening air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant hum of cicadas. As Hiroshi and Yuki returned to the village one last time, a sense of finality settled over them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the ancient houses. The villagers greeted them with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, their whispers following Hiroshi and Yuki as they made their way to Ms. Nakamura's house. The old woman welcomed them warmly, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "You've returned," she said softly. "Have you found a way to help Keiko?" Hiroshi nodded, his expression resolute. "We believe so. We've destroyed the altar and the objects used in the rituals. But there's one more thing we need to do." Mrs. Nakamura's eyes widened with understanding. "The final confrontation," she whispered. As night fell, the village was cloaked in an eerie silence. Hiroshi, Yuki, and Mrs. Nakamura made their way to the road where Keiko had died. They set up a small shrine, lighting incense and placing flowers around it. The moon cast a pale glow over the scene, illuminating their anxious faces. "We must call her spirit, Mrs." Nakamura said, her voice trembling slightly. "And then we must give her the closure she needs." Yuki nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We're ready." They stood in a circle around the shrine, their hands clasped together. "Mrs." Nakamura began to chant softly, her voice carrying through the still night air. The incense smoke curled upwards, forming delicate patterns against the dark sky. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a chill wind swept through, rustling the leaves and sending shivers down their spines. From the mist, a figure slowly emerged. Keiko stood before them, her eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. "Mother," she whispered, her voice ethereal and distant. Mrs. Nakamura's eyes filled with tears. "Keiko, my dear, we've come to help you find peace." Keiko's expression softened, and she took a step forward. "But how?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We've destroyed the altar and the objects used in the rituals," Hiroshi said. "But we need to understand what happened that night. You need to tell us everything." Keiko nodded, her gaze distant. As she began to recount the events of that fateful night, "I was visiting my fiancé," she began. "But when I arrived, I overheard his family speaking about the ritual. They wanted to use me to gain power, to bind my spirit to their will. I panicked and ran. I got into my car and drove as fast as I could, but the road was so slippery." Her voice broke and tears streamed down her face. "I lost control. I crashed. And then everything went dark." Mrs. Nakamura reached out, her hand trembling. "Keiko, you need to let go of the pain. We are here to help you find peace." Keiko's eyes met her mother's, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. "What do I need to do?" she asked softly. Yuki stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to forgive them, Keiko. Release the anger and the pain. Only then can you move on." Keiko nodded slowly, her eyes closing as she took a deep breath. "I forgive them," she whispered. "I release the anger and the pain." A soft light began to emanate from her, growing brighter with each passing moment. Hiroshi, Yuki, and Mrs. Nakamura watched in awe as Keiko's spirit transformed, her sorrow and anguish melting away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for helping me find peace." With those final words, Keiko's spirit faded into the night, the light dissipating into the stars. The air grew still, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as a sense of tranquility settled over them. The following morning, Hiroshi and Yuki stood by the roadside, the events of the previous night still fresh in their minds. Mrs. Nakamura joined them, her eyes filled with a quiet joy. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You've given my daughter the peace she so desperately needed." Hiroshi smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. It was an honor to help. Keiko deserved to be at peace. As they prepared to leave, the villagers gathered to bid them farewell. Their expressions were filled with gratitude and respect, a stark contrast to the suspicion and fear that had greeted them initially. "You've brought peace to our village," Kenji said, his eyes shining with gratitude. "We will never forget what you've done." Hiroshi and Yuki nodded, their hearts filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had faced the unknown, braved the darkness, and emerged victorious. As they drove away from the village, the sun rising to greet a new day, they knew their lives had been forever changed. The ghostly hitchhiker had become a part of their story, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the quest for closure. And as they navigated the winding roads of life, they carried with them the memory of Keiko's peaceful smile, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for light and redemption.